Before we start, can I just make my soapbox request to have everyone put their, not their full name, then at least their job title or role title? It's always helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
FYI, I always come in here and my name is Lucia, but it's spelled Luchia.
Lucia, I think if you hover over your own box, the 3 dots.
Yeah, no, I've changed my name, but every time I come in here, it's
Because I don't think we can change it, and we certainly aren't. That's weird. Mine changes. Sometimes it's Nancy.
All right, well, kicking us off today, I'll be leading, well, I guess I should say some of today's meeting. We have a lot of guest presentations today. So kicking off our May 9th DOTI Advisory Board meeting, kicking off as we usually do with a welcome, roll call, and approval of the prior month's meeting minutes. Figure we'll kick off with that roll call. Wondering, Alan, if you have that documentation ready, or if we should switch to the meeting minutes while we prep that.
I do, yeah, I can run through that real quick.
Awesome.
If you'd like me to, Jonathan.
Sure, please go ahead.
Joni Allen. No, I saw Lucia. I see you're here. Alicia Brown. Brian Carroll. Ian Chowdhury. No. Jake, I saw you're here. Amy Contreras. Hey, Amy. Welcome. Good to see you. Paul, I think I saw you here, right? Yeah. Christopher Johnson, I think I saw you here from Colorado, it looks like today.
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome. Gary Johnson.
Here.
Great. Actually, it's Gary that's here from Colorado instead of Hawaii. Joe Levy, I saw you as well. Jamie Lewis.
Absent. He emailed me, won't be able to make it.
Great. Eileen. Kurt, I saw you. Welcome. Chris Pacheco is off the board. Jonathan is here. Julie, I saw is here. And sad news, Tangier Barnes Wright sent us an email the other day that she's going to be resigning from the board, but just want to thank her again for all her service. She's been a great contributor over the last year. So that's that. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, and a quick note, maybe needs a second to do the math here, but do we have, I guess, a quorum?
We're at 11.
11. Okay, so right at it. I don't think we have any, major decisions to make today, but just like to keep track of that. So with that, moving on to meeting minutes, we do have our meeting minutes from last month, April's meeting. Could I get a motion to approve last month's minutes, or feel free at this moment to register any complaints with last month's minutes, I suppose, before we get to that point.
I motion that we approve the minutes.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right. With that, motion to approve April's minutes. Feel free to raise your hand with either Zoom or with your physical hand, and we can do a quick count of ayes here. All right, looking down the list, I think we have just about everyone. I can't see Christopher. No video today. But if we can lower hands, we'll give a quick moment for nays. I'm seeing none registered. So we'll consider April meeting minutes approved. Thank you for taking those, Alan, and kicking those off again today. That brings us to the public comment portion of our agenda. I'm wondering, Anita, if we have anyone that submitted a request to speak today. I see you just off mute.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now, yep.
Okay, yes, we do. We have Amy. Let me promote her to the panelist.
Awesome. Amy Kenray, a familiar face.
Hi,
Hello.
guys. I couldn't clean up my background quick enough when I realized what's behind me. It's my
Oh.
daughter's room, half of my daughter's room. Okay, I'm going to do public comment on the Safe Routes to School budget. Some of you may know that I am a DPS crossing guard. I know Director Phipps knows that. So just to set the stage here, I know you guys are talking about budget, so that's why I'm doing this comment. To set the stage, we know that 25% of our rush hour congestion is caused by long distance school car trips in Denver, and that 67% of students are driven to school in Denver. So that's kind of horrific. If you don't have kids and you haven't experienced that, I invite you to become a crossing guard and experience it firsthand. So the Safe Routes to School program this year has $1.2 million. That's down from $2 million the previous year. This program needs a minimum of $5 million a year to gain traction. Just to give you some perspective, in 2022, of the 200 DPS schools, only 6, I believe, had construction projects related to Safe Routes to School. So that is not good. We're not getting anywhere. It's a huge contributor to congestion and also a Vision Zero issue. But this program simply has no money towards it. For example, the Safe Routes to School program lead, I believe, is grant funded. And if you're grant funded, that means you don't know whether you're going to have a job next year. And there's only one person in that department. Safe Routes to School has a really great 75-page action plan. I was a stakeholder in that stakeholder committee that worked on this, and it is like on fire. It's a really good action plan, but they need money to execute it. The goals in that action plan are to focus on the highest need schools, to increase the number of kids walking or biking to school by making it safer for them to do so, and to and by empowering communities to support these efforts. Thought I was going to say something else there. In conclusion, please recommend putting $5 million a year towards Safe Routes to School. That's all I've got.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. And Anita, I think you said that was our only person signed up for public comment today. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So for those of you who saw the agenda in advance here, we had 2 items related to the budget and 1 being a water resiliency program briefing. When we discussed this agenda last week, we actually considered possibly bumping up the water resiliency program briefing and moving the 2 budget conversations next to each other. In part, just so Ashley Grace doesn't have to hang on with us through a budget conversation before she can give her presentation. That said, I'm not sure if we have Ashley with us yet, given that we had an expectation that she'd be kicking off a little bit later. Does anyone from the department know if, oh, well, for one, is Ashley actually still is she still the person presenting? And do we know if she can join a little bit earlier, or should we keep her where she is a little bit later on the agenda?
And Jonathan, we can track her down, but I think we missed our report from DOTI leadership.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah,
I got the big man to come join us this time.
All right. Yeah. No, so sorry about that. All right. So yeah, next agenda item is our report from DOTI leadership. And yeah, I see Director Phipps is on the call. So I assume you'll be taking this today.
Yeah, I'm happy to do this and give Nick a few minutes to track Ashley down, because she does an incredible job and certainly can provide a fantastic briefing there. And Amy, if you are still listening, thank you and always appreciate your advocacy, and look forward to being a crossing guard again in the future. And I'll second her recommendation that it is an incredible experience. So certainly would recommend that for anyone on the advisory board or listening in for that matter. It has been a busy spring in DOTI. And I just wanted to share some of the things, and likely you're aware of most of, if not all of these, but I really just want to emphasize a couple of the activities that have been happening. Let me start with an effort that really has been decades in the making, which was our transition to a volume-based pricing model for how we manage solid waste. We launched that on January 1st of this year. And I'm happy to report that with Q1 numbers in, we have increased recycling by 17% so far this year. And I want to just pause and emphasize that for a minute. Unfortunately, Denver was not leading in this area as we think about the people of Denver and the amount of diversion away from the landfill. We simply weren't living to the environmental values that we all endear so much living in Colorado. And that 17% improvement is more than 3 times what we expected to see in that first quarter. So tremendous response from the community and some positive behavioral change as it relates to that. And so a lot of work to continue to do as we roll out compost citywide, but we're certainly excited about how Denverites have responded to that today. Additionally, and we talked about this, I think, just briefly before the meeting started, a big shift in our neighborhoods with 20 is plenty and revising our neighborhood speed limits to 20 miles per hour. That first sign went up last week with thousands of signs to follow over the next couple of years, and we'll certainly work to implement that as quickly as possible. But I think something that really sends a strong message about how we should navigate and how we should live and operate within our communities. So we'll continue to be going citywide on that, but certainly excited for that change. Third, if you've blinked, you may have missed this. DOTI piloted an opportunity to put protected bike lanes in Lodo on Market and Blake at an expedited pace to challenge kind of the traditional thought process on how we execute. And if you haven't been down Market or Blake in the last couple of weeks, it is significantly different than it was 2 weeks ago. We've experimented with some new material. We've applied some new markings and some new techniques, as well as some new implementation strategies. And I think it has come out incredible. And so if you haven't had the opportunity to jump on your bike and go to Lodo recently, I'd highly recommend you do that, and you do that via Market and Blake. And I'm really proud of the DOTI team, both on the planning side, the implementation side, and our operating side on how well they work together and how quickly we were able to make this a reality. And I certainly think we'll see significant safety improvements there. Next, I wanted to recognize some similar improvements that we're doing on 7th Avenue. So this is part of our CTN, Central Bike Network, from Broadway to basically to increase access from the Spear Bike Way to Cheeseman Park. Construction is ongoing now. This includes Vision Zero elements as it relates to some traffic calming devices, but also protected high comfort bike lanes. And so those improvements are in place, and we're excited for those to come to full fruition here this month as well. Let's see, 2 last things I wanted to hit on. One is we are excited to host the National Association of City Transportation Officials here in Denver next week. This is a big opportunity for us to demonstrate not only to the rest of the US what we're doing in the mobility space, but what we treasure the most, which is the opportunity to learn from peers and learn from other cities that are trying things that might be innovative, might be a different technique or approach than what we take. About 1,000 people are expected in town. These are almost all planners, engineers, transportation aficionados at that municipal level. And so really our peers, where we get that opportunity to engage and make sure that we're all working towards implementing what is best in the industry. So, we're honored to host that. This is typically something you see on the East or West Coasts. And so we always try to pull those folks into Denver when we have that opportunity, and something we're certainly excited about. So if any of you are planning to attend, I hope I see you there. If you're not, there's a handful of festivities and opportunities around the conference as well, and just reach out to myself, to Nick, and we'll see how we can get you connected there. And then lastly, a big milestone, and I know Ashley will come on and talk about this here momentarily, but the signing of the project agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers for our water project, our water resiliency project, formerly known as the South Platte River and Tributaries Project, that we were able to do yesterday. We had both of our senators in town for the event, as well as our congresswoman. A representative from the Biden administration, the Assistant Secretary of the Army, as well as some folks from the Army Corps of Engineers. In fact, a fairly strong contingent of folks from the Army Corps of Engineers. A couple of things that I want to just bring to everyone's attention as it relates to this. One, this is a significant investment in Denver. This is $550 million for the betterment of the river and the health of the river. And Ashley will talk through the details there, but a sizable investment. But secondly, we're doing this through an innovative program with the Army Corps that is very much so in its infancy. And it's what the Army Corps refers to as their P3 program. Some of you may be familiar with P3 from a public-private partnership standpoint. In this scenario, the city and county of Denver, and specifically DOTI, is that private partner. And so as opposed to the Army Corps of Engineers implementing the project, DOTI will actually be implementing this. The Assistant Secretary of the Army said himself that the only reason why this came to fruition was the confidence and the competency that DOTI has been able to demonstrate in our ability to deliver major infrastructure projects. And so certainly something that I was happy to hear, and that recognition I think is important. But this is going to be transformative for the river corridor and the opportunity to increase that habitat and restore the habitat to what it once was. So a big project, multiple years in the making, multiple years in the implementation that officially started yesterday. And I'll defer anything further on that to Ashley. But other than that, just wanted to share with the team that we're clearly moving here with our foot on the accelerator, or maybe a better analogy would be both feet planted on the pedals, spinning as hard as we can here. So happy to answer any questions or provide any clarification. Thanks, Jonathan.
And I think we have, unless this is an old hand, Julie, is that a fresh hand or an older one?
It is a fresh hand.
All right.
So this was actually what I was going to raise, but you brought it up when you talked. The volume-based recycling in my neighborhood, the black trash cans are disappearing and no one can get new ones, and everyone thinks it's because of that. Is that true? And if not, or in any case, then why is it so hard to get new? Because that's like some of us, our cans just disappeared. I don't know if they were stolen, and then people were like kind of using other people's, and now it's like we just have a ton of the purple ones, and no one can get the green one. I guess the green ones aren't ready yet, but so people have no idea what's going on or why this is a problem. So I said I would ask and hopefully be able to come back and explain.
Yeah, certainly, and I'm glad you did, Julie. I don't know what the circumstances are, but we have seen an increase in trash cart theft, specifically on the north side of Denver. Why or for what reason, I'm not sure. But either way, a simple call to 311 will get a new trash can out there that next service day. And
that's not been our experience, because we've done the online. You can't call 311 because they tell you to go online. So you go online and you get something that says you've got a work order, and then the work order is 2 weeks, but it's been like a month. So that is not working. Just FYI, but this is not about that. It's not about the volume based.
It is not, Julie, and I'll make sure we
Okay.
have the communication clear with 311. And so we're at about a 2-week turnaround time for cart size change. So let's say that you have a 95-gallon cart and you want to go down to a 65-gallon cart. We've processed about 32,000 of those requests so far this year. That is on about a 2 to 3 week time frame. If your cart goes missing, that's a next day service. And so, Julie, if there's a specific instance that you're familiar with, if you can send that over to myself, I'll make sure that there isn't something broken in the process. But certainly, that's a next day type of replacement, and that has nothing to do with the volume-based pricing for those carts disappearing. It's simply more than likely a case of theft right now.
All right, and Alan.
First of all, I just want to say I'm really excited for all the projects you mentioned. The 20 is plenty. The lightning fast pace that bike lanes went in on Blake and Market. So thank you to you and everyone in the department for working on those. My question was around some of the safety issues we've seen on some of the roads that we partner with CDOT on in the Denver metro area. I know your team has done a great job of focusing on the high injury network. On this side of Denver, we've had 3 pedestrian fatalities on federal right in that little stretch in front of CDOT headquarters. I was wondering, what were your thoughts on collaboration with CDOT, either things that you have done or ideas for working with them to reduce fatalities, especially in the equity communities like we've seen over here, where we've had so many folks unfortunately lose their lives, Director Phipps?
Yeah, Alan, I appreciate both the comment and bringing the visibility to this, and specifically on the west side of Denver, we've had really terrible incidents so far this year, specifically as it relates to fatalities. And we've seen some improvements in areas where we've had targeted investments like West Colfax, but there's other areas that haven't received those investments yet. Excuse me. What I can tell you is we've got some renewed partnership with CDOT as we recognize that the high injury network is the greatest area of challenge here, and the majority of that high injury network is CDOT facility itself. And so we're meeting with our counterparts, both the Region 1 director and her team, on a monthly basis. In fact, we had that meeting this morning. And taking a more collaborative approach than what has happened in the past, recognizing that value alignment that exists today. What I can say is our after action reviews and our critical incident response is now a joint between CDOT and the city and county of Denver, which is an improvement, but also just that knowledge sharing and the strategies collaboration has increased significantly as well. And so what that will mean really translates to two things. Less bureaucracy, and let's be honest, bureaucracy exists in government. When we both are there having the conversation, seeing the challenges firsthand, we both understand the why. We both see the value in those changes, and that will help us expedite. But secondly, we also want to joint and collaboratively go after federal funding for some of these Vision Zero improvements. And what we do know is that when a state DOT and a city DOT partner in the pursuit of federal dollars, the likelihood of being awarded those federal dollars significantly increases. And so we want to both address this from a what can we do today, but how can we continue to move the needle, increase that funding availability and that ability to put improvements out. And so I haven't seen the DOTI and CDOT relationship at this positive point in my entire tenure at the city. And I think there's only opportunity for that to continue to move in the right direction. Nick, who of course is with us today, he is that main point of contact, and he is leading that from the city and county of Denver standpoint. And we can certainly get into more details at a future board meeting if you all would like, about what that exactly looks like, who's involved, and talk through the details on that.
Great, that's really exciting. Thanks so much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Not seeing other hands, a couple questions for me. I think small thing for the first one. When we say that recycling has increased by 17%, do you know how that's measured? Is it weight? Is it volume? Yeah.
It's weight, so tonnage. Yep.
Okay, tonnage. Okay, great. And I'm curious to know a little bit more, if you know, about these lanes on Market and Blake in Lodo. I know we've seen a few other expedited programs move through in conjunction with repaving, such as on 17th over here on just south of Sloan's Lake last year. The department very quickly identified an opportunity to add a protected bike lane along a path that was being repaved in very short order, based on a variety of criteria, including, extremely low parking utilization, existing lane, blah, blah, blah. With Market and Blake in Lodo here, what was unique about this that allowed us to implement so quickly? Were these sort of plans that were planned long? Were these plans actually very long in the works, but we were able to build them quickly, or were they truly from planning to deployment a fast build project in some way?
Good question, Jonathan. And I could answer it in a couple of different ways. I'd say certainly you referenced what we did by Sloan's Lake. We did a similar thing on Bucktail, south of that area where we looked at our operating calendar, if you will, of where we plan to be repaving, and said, hey, we can do better. We can minimize disruption to the community, and we can advance our goals. And we really call that our one build concept. We really took that to the next level of maturity. And what we said is, hey, we did Denver Moves Downtown. And Denver Moves Downtown identified not only some missing bike connections, but also some transit reliability issues as it related to some dedicated transit lanes that we added as part of that project as well. And we challenged just the conventional way in which we've gone about implementing infrastructure in Denver. And as opposed to a public engagement process that was linear, in which we would do a large planning effort, and then a more narrowed neighborhood planning effort, and then a project effort, we looked at the opportunity to combine those to ensure that we weren't losing the opportunity for that community feedback, but we also weren't trying to do it in a way that was linear, that reduced our opportunity to get improvements out quicker. And so this was us saying, hey, there's an area where we've planned for bike infrastructure. There's an area where we've planned for increased transit infrastructure. Let's take advantage of that planning effort and move to implementation more quickly. We're going to evaluate this. We'll understand certainly over the next couple of months if that created any hindrances or challenges as we look at this in the next iteration. But this is what we're trying to shift towards as we look at ourselves as a modern mobility first transportation department on how do we go from idea to engagement to plan to design to execute in a less lengthy process. And so I hope to see a lot more of this in the future. And really, this is just a shift in our strategy as a department.
I'd agree. Sounds like a market improvement. Great. Jake, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, is it a bad joke to say, especially on Market Street, Jonathan? But no, I'm super impressed with the department on this project. I think it's phenomenal to just watch it. It's like a magic trick. It was really cool to watch the department pull this off. Are there lessons that the department's gathering in this that could be used to leverage maybe as a rapid response plan if we're seeing particular changes in crash data or Vision Zero as we go forward?
Yeah, certainly, Jake, and another good question. So after every effort that we do in DOTI, whether this is an operational effort or a project effort or a planning effort, we do an after action review, and we commonly refer to it as a hot wash, and really try to capture those lessons learned and document those lessons learned as quickly as possible. Because one, we want to not make the same mistake twice, but two, this isn't the only area of town that we're looking at these types of improvements currently, and so if we have the opportunity to catch it right off of completion on project A while we're in implementation on project B, then great. And so we'll certainly be doing that. We're also happy to publish those. We had the opportunity, Nick and I, and Earl as well, to communicate our 2023 work plan out to City Council a few weeks ago. And a lot of conversation around some of the traffic calming that we're doing throughout the neighborhoods. And one thing that I emphasized with council in the committee was we're trying to create a culture in DOTI in which we aren't afraid to fail. And that doesn't mean that we want to be wasteful. That doesn't mean that we don't want to be prudent with our decision making. But we do recognize that there are significant safety needs in our infrastructure across Denver. And if we have an idea that we think will improve that, then I want our culture in DOTI to be willing to give that a try. Now, what that will mean is that we may have some misses. What that will mean is that we may have some solutions that weren't the ideal or the perfect solution, but did make an improvement. To have that culture of a willingness to fail creates a culture in which there's innovation. And I've hit innovation a few times here, and I think that's intentional with what our workload looks like and what our vision looks like as a department. And so we want to try to capture the best that we can with the information that we have available, and then learn from it and make it better next time. And so certainly that hot wash or that after action review is a significant component of that. And we're happy to share that. We're happy to share those lessons learned. We'll do that at NACTO next week. We'll share with the other communities on what we've tried and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And we'll do that, of course, with anyone who would like to listen. We're not afraid to learn from that. So could potentially be another good conversation, Jake, for a future board meeting of, hey, what did we learn? What do we wish had gone smoother, or what do we want to make sure we replicate on the next one?
Love it. Love the courage.
So we are a little over the 5 minutes we typically hold for this, but I do see one more hand here. So let's have Joe go forward before we transition over to Ashley.
Well, thanks. I'll make this quick. Thanks, Adam. This has been very informative. I appreciate you taking the time. One thing I just heard was that the governor has signed the bill for traffic enforcement to release some of the restrictions. And I understand that's probably more in the enforcement policy and the public safety, but I think we got to jump on this quickly because that's in my neighborhood, that's probably the biggest thing about speeding and everything else. And what role DOTI might have in helping to move this along and really get something going. I know it's going to take funding and people, but it seems like now that we have this opportunity, people will really see good results and they'll get off my back, for lack of better terms. Yeah.
Well, Joe, appreciate the comment, and Nick and I will huddle after the meeting here and help understand how that state legislation impacts DOTI and if there's any opportunity there for sure.
All right. Thank you so much, Director Phipps, for joining us today. Really appreciate the insights you've shared. And as mentioned a little bit earlier, before I almost accidentally skipped that part of the agenda, I see Ashley Grace, who joined us here. We moved you up in the agenda here so you don't have to wait through our whole budget talk to give your presentation here. For those watching, Ashley is joining us today to give us a little update on progress and upcoming milestones related to our water resilience program. Dr. Phipps referred to this briefly. You may have seen recent press releases about us working with a few external organizations on some early large projects here. So wanted to give us an opportunity, give the department an opportunity, and those who watch this an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what's meant by our water resiliency program. And with that, Ashley, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I've heard a lot about this committee, so very excited to actually get to see y'all in person-ish. So I am Ashley Grace. I work for the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and I have the great fortune to help lead our what we now call the Waterway Resiliency Program. And it's a pretty large infrastructure investment that both the city and our partners at the Army Corps are moving forward implementing along South Platte River, Weir Gulch, and Harvard Gulch. So if you forgive, it's been a minute since I've been on Zoom, and my computer reminded me that as I had to update my app. But I need to just figure out how I share my screen. There it is, the big green button. Oh, but I'm disabled. Can someone make it so I can share my screen, so I can share my presentation?
I believe that would be Nanita who can pass those rights.
All right, well, oh, sorry, go for it, Nanita. While she's working, go for it, Jonathan.
I was just gonna say that Nanita muted herself again in case she was trying to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Give me 1 second here.
So I've got a number of slides while she's doing that kind of speak a little bit to the background and the why of this. And I'll run through some of our benefits slide kind of quickly because we've got a lot of really great messaging around that, but I know I have a short amount of time on the agenda and then we'll get to the next steps. So I'll just kind of breeze through some of the slides, but a lot of this will be.
Let me know if you can share now.
Yes, awesome. Okay. Yes. Okay. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Got it.
All right. Okay, great. So yes, Waterway Resiliency Program, which is a project that will be improving Weir Gulch, South Platte River, and Harvard Gulch. So before I jump into the what is this project, just want to take a moment to kind of reflect on why we are really starting to invest in our waterways. And so when you think historically about kind of what the South Platte River looks like, you can see that the South Platte River, before we came through and added a bunch of dams and really channelized it so that we could effectively build around it, it definitely had lots of twists and turns and curved and had a pretty nice wide floodplain. But as a result of urbanization and a need to develop the land around it, we have really channelized the river and many of our tributaries and waterways, which has really significantly degraded our ecosystem and habitat along the South Platte River. And another constant battle we're always trying to address is flood risk. So those are always things top of mind when we're thinking about projects as it relates to our waterways. Is there's now this recognition that the way that rivers flowed historically before urban development, they flowed that way for a reason. And so what can we do to try to restore some of those natural benefits of the floodplain that used to exist? The other reason that projects like the one that we're going to talk about today have come into existence existence is that we've also just, as I was starting to say, I've learned a lot of lessons over the past several decades about land use management in our city and what we can do to better balance our natural resources within the urban environment. So we historically developed a lot of our cities in the country around our waterways because they were a really important way to move things. They were, we could use our waterways to actually, move cargo and freight and all of that. And now we've got much more efficient uses on our roads and our trains. And so as a result, we still have kind of this historic development along rivers that we're starting to transform. We're recognizing there's an opportunity to start to build assets and recreational amenities along our waterways. So you can see that middle picture. So this is all at Globeville Landing Park, kind of what we used to treat it like in the 70s. One of our first big attempts to try to improve it in the 90s. And then a recent project that says 2000, but really that was completed about just a few years ago. That's part of our Platte to Park Hill project. But you can see that we've gone from kind of recognizing the need to use these spaces for recreational amenities to recognizing they can actually serve multiple benefits. So what you see now, what we're doing with this park over on that right side is we've created not only a park that has a lot of great recreational access and opportunities, but it also provides a lot of stormwater treatment, which is another thing we're recognizing, so that our spaces can have these multi-functions that can really help to restore our natural systems, again, within these urban environments. So that's where, Denver especially has been really continuing to adapt and learn how to utilize our land better in ways that are multifunctional, functional, and multi-beneficial. So another thing to understand about kind of where this project comes from and why we're so excited is that I think I heard as I turned on, was able to plug into the Zoom, Adam referring to our one build approach. We also have a one water approach here that's not just a city-led effort, but an effort that is in partnership with all of the other water entities within the region. And it's really looking at how can we, knowing and recognizing that water is such a precious resource, especially out here in the West, how can we work collaboratively with our partners to address all the elements of the water cycle, be it water supply, wastewater, stormwater, flood protection. And so the city spearheaded an effort to create a one water plan, but did so in strong partnership with those partners you see on the bottom right. And that plan put together a one water philosophy that this project definitely embodies, in that it addresses all of these goals you see here on the screen, all 5 goals. It's even called out in the plan as kind of one of those major projects that really helps us start to put one water philosophy in the ground. But this one water philosophy, again, just kind of creates this way and space for us all to start working together on how we're managing our water. And so when we think about this project, again, we think of this as one of our first major investments in moving this one water philosophy forward in terms of a project. There are other offshoots of our one water plan, there's policies and that kind of thing, but this again is one of our most exciting opportunities to start putting this in the ground in the form of a project. So the project I'm talking about specifically is a project that has been in the works for a very long time. I think we've been working on restoring the river since the 70s, at least, after those major floods. But this one specifically really started to take shape starting around 2008, when we requested that the authority be expanded. There was a study going on in Adams County with the Army Corps around the South Platte River. We asked to expand that to include the city and county of Denver. They had to do some reconnaissance work and find the funding to do so, but everything worked out. And so between 2014 to 2018, the city and county of Denver partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers to lead an integrated feasibility report and environmental impact statement. And what that does is really set the groundwork for what the project we have ahead of us. That's really where you can see we evaluated a number of alternatives, and we looked at what's the right way to improve the South Platte River and some of its core tributaries. So when you look at that document, that lays out the concepts that we will be moving forward as we start to implement this project. There's a series of steps that still have to be taken. This is a federal project, so there's a series of federal steps that have to be taken. That's all those fun things on the bottom there, the record of decision and chief's report. The project had to be authorized within the Water Resource and Development Act, which was in 2020, so that it could get funded and move forward. And then just last year, the full federal funds were appropriated, which was to be honest, a little unexpected that we'd get all of the federal funds all at once. We thought we might have to kind of work on this throughout the next 10, 20, 30 years, kind of piecemeal this together. But we were all very thrilled to learn that we received the full federal appropriations from the project, due in large part to the passing of the bipartisan infrastructure law. that the Biden administration passed. So we have since then been working really hard with our core partners to develop what our project partnership agreement looks like. And so I have a few slides towards the end here that talk to the fact that we are actually moving forward with this very innovative and unique approach to delivering this project in partnership with the Corps, with the city and county of Denver getting to take the lead in project delivery, which is really one of the first times the Corps has ever allowed that to happen with an entity. So we're really excited to be a part of that pilot program. And the most exciting thing for me right now, and hopefully many in the city, is that we signed that project partnership agreement yesterday. And so we are finally able to start looking ahead and say, how do we deliver this project? And we've been working on that as well. So we're not starting from scratch today, but we can really start to spend all of our efforts on that project delivery piece. So a quick map of where we're talking about, where does this project occur? So this project, there's 3 pieces of it that are in the brighter blue color. There's the South Platte River portion. We were focusing on ecosystem restoration of the South Platte, starting around 6th Avenue or at Phil Milstein Park and heading all the way up into Adams County, so around 58th or so. And we'll be focused on ecosystem restoration and some flood risk management. We'll also be doing what's called structural flood risk management on Weir Gulch, where we'll be opening up the channel and increasing the conveyance and capacity of the gulch itself. So it can handle a 100-year flood event. And then the Harvard Gulch project will focus more on a voluntary program with properties that are in the floodplain and at risk of flood risk of flooding, and helping them improve their structures and remove that flood risk. We've also highlighted we, at the same time, have another Army Corps project happening on the south section of the South Platte, starting around Mississippi and headed to the boundary. That's being traditionally led. So the Army Corps is leading that. That's in design as we speak, and also focused on ecosystem restoration. So by the time these 2 projects are complete, we will have really made significant strides in improving the ecosystem along the South Platte River, which is quite exciting. One of the reasons the city especially has put so much effort in ensuring we get the funding and moving this project forward is because this project is very much needed in some of our neighborhoods where infrastructure like this is needed most. So we have tons and tons of maps at the city. So I've just cherry picked a few really, really important ones to our project, which are that, we at the city within the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure have an equity index. All the departments have an equity index, or majority of them, at least that I know of, but ours really focuses on where can we really invest that, where are investments for infrastructure needed the most, and where can they have the biggest impact? And so you can see on that middle map there, a lot of our project area, red is where our infrastructure investments are definitely needed most. You can see that that's very much aligns with a lot of our project area. To the right there, we've also mapped street segments and classified them by what are some of our hottest streets. And again, you can see a lot of those occur within our project area. And then there in the middle, you can see that we've also mapped where Denver has its biggest heat vulnerability, or neighborhoods with the largest heat vulnerability. And again, you can see our project area aligns with that. And that's important because we know that with this project, this infrastructure investments are not just for today, they're for many, many decades into the future. And so it's very important we start investing more of this type of infrastructure, this green infrastructure that not only adds shading and cooling through, adding vegetation, it also has that evapotranspiration effect, but it also is an opportunity to encourage folks to get out and enjoy our nature within the city and really kind of promote those healthy lifestyles. So there's a lot of different benefits that I think we're aiming to achieve with this, but these maps really speak to how important it is that we move this project forward in the neighborhoods we're moving it forward. So I am just talking a million miles a minute. I apologize, and someone please stop me if you have questions. I've got a few more slides here. So I've got a number of slides on our benefits of this project, and I'm going to go through these kind of quickly because there's far too many. But when we think about the benefits, we put them into 5 main buckets, which are captured here. We have a flourishing ecosystem will be one of the main results of this project, primarily along the South Platte River, but also flood risk reduction is also a really important part of this project. But the other thing that's really exciting, and again, one of the reasons the city is super thrilled to be leading this, is that we get to focus on some of the other things that are especially important, that we know are important for our residents, which include improved mobility. We hear that in every plan we ever do. We want to be able to move around the city safely. easily. And so we will be adding new and improved trail segments both along the South Platte River and Weir Gulch. And that the other thing we hear a ton about is the need for more access to healthy environments and recreational opportunities. And so there's a good chunk of our project will be focusing on creating more opportunities to access these new and improved amenities we'll be building. And a really important thread through all of this, as I just kind of touched on, is the need for really focusing on environmental justice benefits for the communities that have been traditionally underserved within the city itself. So there's a few fun facts on this. Another couple reasons that from an ecosystem perspective, this project is so important is the South Platte River is part of the Central Flyway. So there's a lot of migratory birds, including some that are endangered and or on the state list that rely on this habitat. So it's important we work on preserving and restoring it. We'll also be increasing a lot of wetland, and over 80% of species in Colorado use wetland and riparian habitats. So we'll be making significant improvements in that landmass type in Denver as a result of this project. So again, I'll make sure that these slides are made available, and they're also available on our webpage, so you can kind of skim through what this some of these benefits, but they get a little redundant to what I'm saying out loud versus what's on the slide. But the other big thing that we talked about is flood risk mitigation. And so I'm going to work my way from the bottom up on this slide, but the South Platte River will definitely have some flood risk benefits for the 100 structures, for about 100 structures or so currently located on the South Platte River. We have that non-structural project or program on Harvard Gulch. There will be 176 structures that have been identified that would be eligible to participate. So it may be raising structures and or filling basements or other mechanisms and means to help reduce their flood risk. And then Weir Gulch, as a result of this project, we anticipate we'll be removing 360 structures from floodplain designation. So removing them from that risk of flooding as well as the burden of flood insurance. So that's a really important part and focus of the Weir Gulch project, in addition to the recreational and mobility benefits we'll be bringing to that neighborhood, both in Barnum West and Barnum. Again, a little bit redundant here. Mobility benefits, we talked a lot about those, as well as the recreational benefits, and just want to re-emphasize how important recreation is to residents here in Denver. We hear in every plan, including in the very recently completed and adopted West Neighborhood Planning Initiative. That's in West Denver, where that that Weir Gulch project occurs. But you can see this is just an example. It is emphasized throughout the entire plan that they would like more trails and opportunities to access our waterways. And so I think this project will be a great opportunity to provide that. So just a few more slides. So where are we at? We are at the early stages. This project we've thought through a lot in 2018, and then it kind of sat there while we looked for funding because it was a pretty significant project. And now we are in the midst of finalizing, well, we just finalized our agreement. And now we get to look forward to how we deliver. So just a couple of quick things on this agreement. As I mentioned, this is truly a precedent-setting partnership with the Army Corps and the City and County of Denver. So we have been entered into the Alternative Delivery Program with the Army Corps. And that is a program that the Army Corps headquarters has created to pilot ways to, you can see they have three purposes here: to accelerate delivery through efficiency and a performance-based contracts, which is really where their alternative delivery comes from; to optimize local participation and provide non-federal sponsors like Denver more control; and to provide significant life cycle cost savings for the federal government and for the non-federal sponsor. And we'll talk about that in a second. But why did they look to Denver, and or why are we excited? Well, first of all, we have been building a very strong partnership with our Army Corps district, which is located in Omaha, for the last several decades. We have just a lot of the reason we all feel very comfortable moving this forward is because we truly have such a wonderful relationship. We can pick up the phone, we can call each other, and we can problem solve, and there's a lot of trust there. So I think that really sets us up for success in kind of this pilot space. We also have really good partnership both between Omaha and the Mile High Flood District, which is an important partner for us here locally as we think about flood risk management projects. We've delivered some really exciting and cool projects that are large-scale infrastructure projects utilizing alternative delivery. The recently completed Platte to Park Hill really utilized all those things and created not only a stormwater management project, but also focus on water quality treatment, and provided very unique and exciting recreational amenities for the community. We've got tons of local support and partnership here that, you know, we had an MOU that was executed in 2021 with folks from throughout the region committing their time and interest to this project. We've got good relationships with the community, and by being a part of this alternative delivery program, it allows us to utilize our community engagement strategies, a lot of which I think I heard Adam starting to speak to as I was just hopping on. But we've been focusing a lot on what good community engagement looks like for the city of Denver. What are our expectations, and how do we remain accountable to our citizens and stakeholders? And so by being in the lead, we get to, again, kind of lead what that engagement looks like from a public outreach to a stakeholder engagement. And it also allows us to really optimize our funding opportunities and financing opportunities. So we were accepted into that program in the fall, and we just, again, signed that project partnership agreement yesterday, which means we finally get to move forward and we get to start accessing those dollars that were made appropriated last year through the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And our agreement, I may have borrowed some slides from previous presentations, but our agreement, the things that it does is it really outlines how are we splitting the costs for this project. The project partnership agreement that we have is setting us up so that the city will take the lead and we will be reimbursed by the Army Corps. So it speaks to what that reimbursement looks like. It speaks to how we're going to collaborate. Again, this is a really new role for the Army Corps. So we've taken a lot of time to document what that means and what that looks like. So we're really trying to clarify roles and responsibilities and understand who has what approval rights and oversight and what governance looks like. You can see down here, what does this mean from a financial perspective? There are definitely financial obligations that will be a part of this partnership and this project, but we are still working through a lot of what that looks like as we continue to update some of our cost estimates and talk through with our partners what their commitments are to this project. And all of those major financial obligations will be up to, you know, we'll be bringing back to our city council, et cetera, and going through very official channels to ensure we are, as a city, very confident that we are making the right types of financial commitments with this project as we move forward. And so this just outlines what we just signed, which is that project partnership agreement, that cost share addendum that clarifies kind of those cost splits, and also, again, that implementation plan. What is the Corps doing? What is the city doing? And one other thing that implementation plan does that's very cool is it designates or it delegates authority from the headquarters of Army Corps down to our Omaha district. So it really empowers them to be good partners in helping us move this project forward in a very timely fashion. So last slide here, next steps, where are we? The next steps really highlighted on this slide is that we're really moving towards, and this is a little too jargony, so my apologies, but really moving towards implementation. So we're going to be moving forward with some major contract opportunities to make sure we can engage industry, and we're working really hard to figure out how we really build up our local capacity and our local industry so that we've got a lot of experts here. How do we utilize them and take advantage of that, but also make sure we can deliver this project in a really timely fashion. So those two kind of rows of arrows there. The first one is just we're working on getting a lot of program support because this is a massive program. We want to run it quick, efficient, and we want to run it the right way. And so we need some support in that space. And then that gray bar speaks to the fact that we are being very thoughtful in how we're engaging industry and what our actual contracting framework will be for when we do bring the design and build teams on board. So I kept this in here just to illustrate that we think by the end of this year, we'll be getting some of that program management support on, which is important because that's what's going to enable us to really begin that community outreach in a much more robust way. We don't really have a ton of resources internally to do the type of engagement that's needed just yet, but we will by the end of this year. But that also we will start to, we anticipate we will have documents out to get our design and construction teams starting to bid on this project by the end of this year, early next, so that that means that design will be kicking off likely in 2024. And it'll take some time to design everything, but then construction will be following after that. And then finally, that last is that we do anticipate we'll be standing up some stakeholder working groups towards the end of this year. So I tried to condense a very massive project into just a few minutes and slides. I spoke very fast. I'm sure there's tons of questions, or maybe y'all fell asleep, but I'm happy to take a few questions. Joe.
Yes, thank you. That was a very much informative, information-packed presentation. Thanks. I just had a question about how we get more information, say like on the Harvard Gulch of what the neighbors, what opportunities there are. Do you have a contact or anything, or a time when they should start to think about that?
Sure. So Harvard Gulch, so you can see on the bottom left here, denvergov.org, waterway resiliency. There is an opportunity to go on there and actually just sign up for future emails and communications about the project. We are definitely a ways out from kind of figuring out exactly how we want to, we want to make sure that when we go out to the community, we can answer their questions. And right now we have a lot of questions we're working to answer. So I'll say that in general, communications with the public kind of in a consistent way is still probably a ways out towards the end of this year, at least. We'll try to have a few soft touch points throughout this year because we know that there's been press releases and people know this project's happening. So I'm still kind of working through that, what that looks like. We'll probably, for instance, have a booth at the Greenway has an event in like the summer that's really fun, and we'll go out and talk a bit about the project. But as far as kind of the specific program in Harvard Gulch, that's going to take us a while to try to figure out. There's a lot, it's a new program for us. It's a bit of a new program for the Army Corps. So there's a lot of bugs to work out in Harvard Gulch. We'll get there. It's just going to take a little bit of time. So we need, so what I'm asking is a little bit of patience as we kind of get us up to speed, get our staff on board and get all of our support on board. But it is definitely our goal to try to create a lot of that website. We're trying to make sure we update that on a monthly basis with any new information related to the project. And then as we, I think in the next year to 2 years, we're going to see a lot more action on that webpage with a lot more information, and definitely we'll work on making sure that folks, whether they're in Harvard or Weir, understand what this project means for them.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yes. Hey, so I have two questions, but I'll just ask one first, and then let Jake go, see if we have time for another. On that subject of what this project means for folks along Weir Gulch and Harvard Gulch, I think as I'm seeing the slides, it all sounds very exciting, but I think I don't really comprehend what is meant by restoration. I know you had a few maps suggesting that there are heat issues, so that suggests we'll add shade through likely trees and other things. But as I think about Weir Gulch and some of these locations, the Weir Gulch path along that Weir Gulch stream, a lot of it is channelized concrete and bound between homes to some extent. So do you have any way of explaining or examples of what restoration means in a situation like that? What can we do to restore habitat and meet some of these other goals? I guess I'm having a hard time imagining what it could look like, what it is, what action we're taking.
Sure. I think I have a slide if you give me, yeah. So there's two things I want to point out. I want to answer your question. B, the ecosystem restoration is predominantly focused on the South Platte River.
Okay.
So it's considered by the Army Corps a dual purpose project. So there's ecosystem restoration and then there's flood risk reduction. And the majority of ecosystem mitigation or ecosystem restoration is occurring along the South Platte. So the main goal for Weir is flood risk reduction. It's getting all of those properties and structures out of the floodplain. But as far as what does it look like? So I have this slide here. This is a concept from the southern stretch that I spoke about, the one that's currently in design being traditionally led by the Army Corps. And so when we think about it, you can see one of the things that we've this cross-sectional change. There's, it's a 6.5 mile stretch that we're working on. This is a couple mile stretch, but generally you can get the idea here, which is that we've really channelized the South Platte River in pieces. And so where we've channelized it, we will be working. So the gray is what the current cross-section looks like on the river. But you can see as a result of this project, we lay back the banks and we create more space for wetlands and more of those wetland and riparian habitats. And so that's what we mean is really just taking up more space that allows the river to do what it more naturally would want to do. We unfortunately can't expose the entire floodplain because it's far too much land, but definitely give it a bit more land and try to let it be a little bit more natural, if you will. So more of that native vegetation or we're actually calling it climate adapted vegetation, because native is even starting to change a little bit. Like, what does native mean in 50 years, right? So, but the idea is that we can have some of that naturally occurring vegetation that really promotes biodiversity, really be able to take root and thrive into the future. So that's what hopefully answers your question. I mean, there are pieces where we've actually had the reverse problem. It's gotten too wide, too much sediment is built up, and we're going to actually have to dredge and channelize it a little bit because it's gotten a little too out of hand.
And so I
So
expect
it's
that might be more of the solution along the Weir Gulch where it's already pretty narrow and maybe has built up, or it sounds like in some cases along Weir, you're actually attending to the homes themselves. It's not really even about the gulch. It might be taking actions on the homes and properties. Is that right?
there are pieces of the gulch that do flow underneath homes. It has been put underground, and that current pipe cannot really contain that conveyance need of that 100-year event. So we will be looking at how do we increase that conveyance capacity? How do we open it up? But there's a lot. I mean, there's definitely a recommended concept that you can go and take a look at the FEIS. But one of the reasons we're also excited about alternative delivery is that what that brings to the table is the opportunity to really challenge our industry partners to innovate. How do we address our conveyance and capacity needs and minimize impacts, maximize benefits? So we've got a preliminary concept out there in our FEIS, but we're going to work to really improve upon that as we move into the design phase.
Right on. Well, I can pass it over to Jake from there.
Thanks, Jonathan.
What was great is Jonathan basically asked the question I was going to ask, which has now inspired a new one for me. So I actually really wanted to see this visual and get a sense for what it would look like. I think what's most exciting to me about this project is the potential to, I told someone that, right, like the South Platte is one of our greatest natural assets, and we kind of treat it like a sewage pipeline. And I'm like really excited about the potential to restoring it to some prominence as a natural asset. You know, particularly like I think of like specific subsections like between like 20th and Brighton per se, like there's just some rough, not fun, like doesn't feel like a key thing that Denver was founded next to. Is there in some sections, will there be additional right-of-way acquisition that needs to occur? And or how should citizens of the city think about what this change means, like from a broader sense, not just from the floodplain aspect and you know the natural aspect, but like what does it mean to our city that this project is going on? Sorry, I never finished that sentence.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think as we move into design, we'll better understand if and or what right-of-way impacts may look like. I mean, we'll also be challenging ourselves from a city perspective of, you know, if there are roads along the river, do they need to be there? And are there, you know, we just, for instance, just vacated Arkins as an example. And, you know, I think that's a good example of kind of what we want to see along a river. And so I think simultaneous to this project, I know there's another effort that is again being kind of spearheaded across the city, by the city, but across like the city with our various departments to look at what, you know, there are many places around the country that have some land use related codes, whatever it may be, along their waterways. And we don't really have much along the South Platte River. So I think simultaneous to this project, there's other folks having policy conversations about what can we do to really protect the space along these waterways and ensure we don't, you know, put our buildings right up there adjacent to them. And so I can't say what exactly that's going to look like or mean, but I can say that when you invest as much money as we're about to invest in the river, it definitely spurs some really important conversations about how do we protect these investments and how do we ensure we don't get right back into the same problem in another 50 to 100 years. So I can't give you much definition to your question, but it was a good one and one that I think a lot of folks, both within the city and our regional partners, were all asking ourselves and talking about, like, how do we really protect our waterways and think about what that looks like adjacent to those waterways. So nice non-specific response for you.
All right. And just briefly, I don't want to commandeer all this time. Any other questions from the group before I hop back in? I see no hands. I think quick question about this arrangement, this new arrangement with the Army Corps of Engineers. You mentioned Denver is the first to be approved to own project delivery for what is fundamentally an Army Corps of Engineers project. And you had a slide describing some of the perceived benefits, including cost savings related to this. I'm wondering where we expect those come from in having Denver take the lead here. Like I would think if, you know, the Army Corps of Engineers has been doing projects like these for decades, they really have this sort of down to a science per se. They'd have those efficiencies and economies of scale, and it would actually be somewhat riskier to say, let's go out on a limb and trust a partner, even one we built a good relationship with, and with the Mile High Flood District, et cetera, et cetera. So do you have any idea where this perception of cost savings is coming from?
Absolutely. Magic. No, I'm just kidding. I do have a good answer, which is that so the Army Corps definitely has delivered a lot of these projects. However, there's a couple of things I'll say. The Army Corps is not really well known for delivering them very quickly or efficiently. And so there's kind of two things here at play that is where we think the cost savings comes from. And the number one thing is well, they go hand in hand, which is, again, we're in this alternative delivery program. So a typical capital project, especially even in the city of Denver, will be, we go out and we ask someone to design it, we get a full design package, and then we go out and we bid it, and then we build it. And what we are in with the Army Corps is the alternative delivery program, which means that we get to use alternative delivery mechanisms to deliver this, where we can, there's a few different ways that shakes out, but it could, essentially it means that we're working to pair our design teams and our construction teams earlier in the process so that they can work with each other, find ways to maybe deliver pieces of the project more quickly, find innovation as they move through design that can be very quickly vetted with the construction end of things. And so the mechanisms of alternative delivery will then lead to our ability to deliver this much more quickly. So the Army Corps thought it would take them roughly about 20 years to construct this project. We think that by utilizing alternative delivery and by being the lead in this, we can shrink that potentially in half. And so with that comes a significant cost savings. The longer it takes to build a project, the more expensive that project will be. So if we can, you know, again, build that in 10 years, we're going to see a huge cost savings there. So those are kind of the main ways that we think we'll find that cost savings. And that's what the Corps, and that's why the Corps is so excited about this as well. The Corps definitely does a lot of these projects, but the Corps also does a lot of other stuff that can sometimes take priority and shift their attention. And so we get to be extremely focused on delivery of this project and bringing them along with us. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Ashley, and to add to that, you know, when you look at the Corps' role at a high level, there's things that they are good at and there's things that they're not so good at, right? And so how do we get, how do we bridge the difference between getting them to focus more on what they're good at and allowing communities and states and localities focus more on what they're good at, right? And so this alternative delivery program really turns the traditional role of the Corps kind of on its head in many ways, because normally with a typical Corps project, they take your money and they build, usually on their timeline and over budget. And this flips that on its head by allowing localities to lead projects, which definitely would and turn them into a real grant-making agency, similar to other organizations throughout the government, U.S. federal government. So definitely a great thing, particularly for projects domestically that really could be led and delivered more cheaply and faster for communities, and allow the communities to incorporate their local values is definitely a much better outcome. And so the better we do with this, the more we can see this throughout the country.
Sorry, was muted. Yeah, thank you for the additional context there. Much appreciated. Paul, I saw you had a hand up a moment ago. Do you still have a question for us?
You know, I'm just wondering for our folder, having watched kind of the widening of the Cherry Creek green belt, which took out some of the mature tree cover, but in theory widened the waterway. You know, I know the city has sort of similar goals with competing interests sometimes, adding to the tree cover while cooling the city in heat swamp areas. but also reducing flood risk and all. Looking at this diagram here, which, I mean, just off the top of your head, looks sort of like cutting out some of the areas where existing foliage are. Is there going to be an effort here to plant trees? I know sort of along any waterway where there's even a trickle, trees tend to take root and bloom, but I assume we're going to lose some mature tree cover as a result of this. And are there plans to invest in that and replace it?
Absolutely. The overall end result will be a net increase in our tree canopy. Absolutely. But you're right. Construction does often mean you have to take some trees out. And so we've already stood up an ecosystem working group with a bunch of folks, both at the core and internally, that are very focused on how we do this and how we do this well. And so I'll just say that what you just pointed out is a reality of many construction projects, but one we're trying to be very mindful of. And our city forester has representatives on that team, and we talk about that quite frequently. And we're trying to learn from some of the cool things that have been done recently on big projects. For instance, on the mall, I know that they started growing trees as soon as they knew they had a project, essentially. So they were going to be able to put in some much more mature trees in those tiny little saplings. And so, like, how can we maybe do that on this project? And then another project we're looking to is the Chatfield reallocation project. And so they similarly really disrupted a lot of kind of what existed in terms of the canopy. But what they've done is over time, they've slowly been removing the tree canopy as the water fills. And so they're not just going through wholesale and wiping everything out, but trying to make sure that as trees are needing to come out, they're coming out at the right time. And so there's a few different strategies that we've already heard of that we're thinking about in terms of how can we preserve those mature trees that currently exist today, that are the healthy kinds of trees we want to see in our tree canopy. And we'll continue to look to other ideas and resources across the country, because yes, that is a very important piece of this. So like you said, we're going to try to balance the fact that there are pieces where it's going to have to happen, but what can we do to try to minimize that impact? Good question.
Great. And I want to thank you, Ashley, for allowing us to run over time here. Obviously, a lot of interest in this project. But yeah, we're at 5:15 now and need to move on to our next topic. So thank you again for presenting. I'm really excited to see this come to fruition. I know it'll be a while till we get there, but excited to see it moving forward, and appreciative to the Army Corps of Engineers for the large grant. Yes, thank you. And
Thank you all.
Yeah, have a nice evening. Our next topic here is actually sort of a two-parter. Both related to the budget. First and foremost, we'll ask Earl to share with us any updates about what's happened in the last month, or if there have been any changes to that timeline slide he showed us last month, any adjustments to process schedule activities that have happened related to the budget in the last month or so. From there, Alan will lead us in a discussion on behalf of the Budget and Finance Committee about that letter we've been drafting about our organization's or our board's priorities to share with the department, and in particular the results of some of that prioritization exercise we performed over the last couple of weeks. So Earl, I will hand it to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. Really just three high-level changes from last month's meeting to today. So here within the last few weeks, the city's held its annual budget kickoff for the 2024 process. And really the only three changes that we have to report on, and they're relatively minor depending on how you look at it, but city council priorities will be coming out by the end of this month. So I don't know how that's going to look like, given that some council members are leaving, some are coming, and what that will look like, but I guess we'll see it when we see it. The directive on sort of thus far on the budget process for 2024 is sort of really two-parted. So we are, given that we're going through a mayoral transition, we are going to be submitting the first part of the budget process, which is what it takes to address the continuation of current city services. So anything related to that, to also include anything associated with a mandate that might start in 2024, or anything, inflationary related, or, there might be, certain needs that we need now that might, that really support our ability to deliver the continuation of services. And then the new administration, when they are official in July, they will work to communicate what their priorities will be for 2024, above and beyond what the continuation of services are. So given that the timing of everything, obviously want to have the new administration, whoever that is, and their team, to be able to put to a degree a stamp on what takes place over the course of the year in their first year as the administration. So any questions related to that? And then what I can do also is I can update the presentation and then send that to you here within the coming week if needed. But largely the dates that we set out last month are largely the same, but I'm going to go ahead and do another update for June with the hopes that we'll have some city council priorities and guidance around that, as well as if there are any further updates to the timeline and the guidance that's been provided.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that brief update. We'll look forward to hearing what City Council has to say as we move forward.
Should be interesting, say the least.
Yeah. Some of those draft frameworks they have to work with.
Yep.
Okay, so what is effectively then a large update from our Budget and Finance Committee here. Alan, I think I can pass over to you now.
Great, thanks so much, Jonathan. Nanita, would you be able to give me sharing access so I can share my screen for this portion? And while you're working on that, just to recap with that, thank you so much. And while you're working on that, just to kind of recap the process so far for everyone, we started earlier this year soliciting wish list items from this board on what we would like to see going forward. We also got feedback from the board that we would like more of a feedback loop on some of these items that we're putting forward as well. So we compiled our wish list. We put out kind of a draft letter. Everyone's had a chance to give comment and feedback on that. So let me see if I can share can everyone see my screen here? So here's our draft letter here that we've put together. I'll go through this a little bit more in a minute, but originally we just had the list of feedback items. And I pretty much thank you for everyone's input. I broke down the survey averages that everyone had to try to categorize it into high, medium, and low. We had about 12 board members give feedback for that. So really appreciate that, is how we've grouped. So what I wanted to do today is quickly chat as a group to go through to see if anyone has any feedback on the list of priorities, where they stand, see if we missed anything that, or addition, Julie and others had great feedback on some of this. I thought that was great. Based on where I'd like to start is really to quickly chat about the feedback that we had earlier in public comment around additional funding for the Safe Routes to School program. I took the liberty to kind of bundle this into our third bullet point that most people scored very high on the list. We had a dedicated funding for raised crosswalks around school, studying a pilot program for at least one raised crosswalk around school in each district. I thought that this kind of dovetailed into the expand the Safe Routes to School program, and increasing the budget to 5 million was, I think, the recommendation we had. I wanted to see quickly before we add this, if the board is comfortable with this based on that community feedback that we had earlier. Lucia, go ahead.
Hi, so I guess I don't know enough about the Safe Routes to School program, other than, raised crosswalks. What kind of things would money be spent on?
Yeah, so Nick, do you have any insights on that in terms of what like the typical implementation is of those projects? I mean, just to speak from my perspective, it is things like raised crosswalks, kind connectivity, stop signs, crosswalks around schools and things like that.
Yep.
Is that a fair statement, Nick?
That is, yep, Ellen, I think you got it.
Great. So it'd be more opportunities for, if you had more budget on that line item, Nick, it would allow you to implement safe routes to schools, whether it's crosswalks or bike lanes or things like that for more kids in more parts of Denver.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Great.
Alan,
Any
quick-
other?
quick thing,
Yeah, go
can-
ahead, Jonathan. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you zoom in a little bit? It's a bit hard to read on.
Yeah, I am sorry. I will absolutely zoom in here if I can figure this out. You have to forgive me.
Control plus should.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a Microsoft guy, so I really appreciate that hint there. But so just to recap quickly, the listed items that we had for high priorities were increased Vision Zero funding, increasing the Vision Zero funding by $2 million in fiscal year 2023, funding for more automated enforcement, focusing on arterial streets and the high injury network. We had talked about the dedicated funding for raised crosswalks around schools and safe routes to schools, funding for protected bike lanes, both for upgrading the current network and expanding the network as well, eliminating funding for highway interstate expansion, funding right-of-way enforcement, for bike lane, sidewalks, encroachments, parking, et cetera, including changes necessary to respond to issues in a timely manner. Considering altering right-of-way enforcement priorities to Vision Zero goals instead of focus on metered parking was one of the higher priority things that we had here as well. Focused on areas for existing pedestrian sidewalk funding and new funding from Ordinance 307. So this was kind of a wish list of places that community members as part of this board had added to their wish list of hopes where that funding might go to next year. So advising a little more on policy and implementation as opposed to the actual budget itself. Any questions about these high priorities or thoughts before we move on to the medium priorities? Yeah, Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple things I think that stand out to me. Well, actually, I guess I should back up and say, I know that Nick, Earl, and others are taking a pass through these tomorrow and onwards to give us a sense for what is more or less feasible or viable in their view. Of course, we can't predict the mayor, we can't predict council, exactly how they'll view things, but just knowing from internal department timelines, capabilities, staffing, et cetera, we can get a read on this. I'm excited to see that one of these high priorities is something Joe mentioned earlier, funding for additional automated enforcement of our speed limits and red light violations, given here about how much we hear about that and the crashes that are going through. Really interesting note on that one is that based on the conversation we had with David and Ted that presented to us back in, I think, January or February, the nice thing about that funding is it's almost always returned to the department. We need a little funding up front to install the cameras, but ultimately there are, unfortunately, enough violations that they pay for themselves. So it's almost like a temporary funding measure as opposed to sort of a permanent enduring funding there. I think, as Ted and David mentioned, what we'd actually like to see is that it is a very costly program because it actually encourages people to follow the rules and we don't see so many violations. But reasonably in the short term, I think we can predict it'll cover its own costs of installation. I think one other thing that stands out to me is the focus areas for pedestrian and sidewalk funding in 307. I guess the only concern I have with this one is I know we are pulling our 307. There's a 307 committee pulling together to consider revisions to the ordinance as written. And I think just about anything is on the table there, although it was mostly and it was mostly focused on implementation. But I would note that ordinance did actually have baked into it a specific 6-tier priority order of what would be addressed first, second, third, fourth. And it did tie to a lot of what we see here is the high injury network, places, I guess, depending on how you look at it, low or high on the equity indices, things along those lines. So I don't think it's out of line here, but I'm just not sure that we would want to or seek to override what's already an ordinance that was voted on, and what the 307 committee is being pulled together to determine from an implementation order perspective.
Great. Maybe I could say implement funding based on priorities has been voted on the ordinance, and something along like here are some potential focus areas or something like that to also consider.
Yep, so something along those lines. They maybe even leaning on the 307 committee in their input. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are like suggestions that we have for them to look at and
Yep.
put in their coffers and see what comes up with. Yeah, that makes sense.
Great. Perfect. Great feedback. Thanks, Jonathan. Any other thoughts that you have, Jonathan? Nope. Great. Any other thoughts that anyone has in the high priorities here? Is everyone any objections? Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, Gary, in keeping with that same conversation about the sidewalk program, I would believe that it probably is a bit premature to create a high priority list without the benefit of the required study that would be conducted almost in the entire first year of the program. And then maybe we have opportunity to provide input through that process. So I would, it's not that I would say eliminate this, I would put it in another paragraph and label it, recommendations for future consideration on the 307, ordinance 307. I wouldn't put it in the high priority either. So that would be one consideration. The other thing that's bothering me just a little bit is the discussion about one raised sidewalk or one improvement per district, council district. I think that language should be changed to in response to documented need. I think one of the things that has created some of the inequity that I've been reading about is just this whole notion that we have to spend a certain amount of money per district, irregardless of the actual need. And so I would recommend we change that language. And that's the basic.
I just would like to add to what Gary said. There, I know from a pragmatic and practical point of view, it's sort of as you need, but from a political point of view, each of the council people is going to need to have some love in their district to show the justification. I mean, there's sort of a political side to it. So I think that might be one of the reasons why they need to have each district needs to be touched.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those, there's a reason why we built fighter jets in all 50 states. It's not because it's cheaper. Component here that I think is interesting. I was wondering if we should, and maybe Jonathan's got the exact same feedback as me. I was thinking if for interstate highway, what we actually meant was freeways. I think that like US 6 and some other roads in town are probably what the intent of this was, rather than just I-25 and I-70. So I would probably change that to maybe freeways. Highways are tough because it's like Colfax too. Not that there's any room to expand Colfax, but just trying to come up with a definition that's both broad enough and specific enough.
I have another quick comment when you're ready.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jake. Gary, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little uncomfortable with eliminating funding for highway expansion or because along with that comes consequences. And I would say you can soften that word eliminate. Again, trying to be responsive to the overall Denver Moves 2050 goals. But if you're willing to accept the consequences, which can be fatalities, significant delay, downgrading our city because of access, and making it a place that people want to come to, is something I think you don't want to you don't want to do by using the word eliminate. You may want to say limit the or some such language, but I don't know that we're willing to accept the consequences of such a specific word like eliminate. That's all.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Gary. I appreciate that. Joe, did you have something to add to that as well?
Yeah, well, I think the way to do that, I'm not necessarily on board, but deprioritize is really what we've been talking about. Let's not think as the highway is the solution to everything. We've got a lot of other ways to solve the problem. So I could see maybe there is a case where you have that. Let's not make that the knee-jerk reaction. Yeah.
Any objections to changing the word eliminate to Jonathan? Go ahead. I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I'm no objection to switching to deprioritize, but I will note that we haven't actually seen what's on the docket for FY 2024 yet. We haven't had Nick and Earl like take a look at these and say like what's reasonable, what's viable, etc. I don't know which, highway expansion projects were even being considered for funding in 2024. I think knowing that would help us determine whether the language is deprioritize or eliminate, because we know a little bit better what those consequences would entail per se, like whether it was our intention or not.
Great, thanks for sharing that. Definitely agree. It'd be great if we could see the menu, but at this point, it kind of is what it is. So yeah, I agree. It's tough to make a call, but well, any objections to changing the word eliminate to deprioritize? No? Great. And any objections to this add-in today of expanding the Safe Routes to School program to increase the budget to 5 million? No?
Are those
Okay.
separate bullet points, Alan, or those are one bullet point?
They're separate things, but they're really one
Okay.
bullet point. We can keep it together if you guys want to separate it out. I'm comfortable doing that as well.
Alan, so this is Chris Johnson. I wanted to know more about what happened to the budget, why it was cut. Was the previous year's budget just much higher because they had a special event that they were spending money on? And related to that, where does this 5 million come from? It seems very arbitrary. And if we're taking it seriously and putting a figure in there, we should have a reason for doing so. That's my thought.
I can actually speak to that. Raise your hand real quick on that. This program was cut from 2 million to 1.2 in the prior year, as it was one of the programs that took a haircut during the constrained budget planning times of COVID, when the department predicted having less revenue and then was seeking programs to cut for sort of safety assurances, I suppose. So it would be very reasonable to bring it back to at least the funding it had before. It was not special event oriented, if not bring it higher. And also noting on the 5 million, Amy referenced this briefly in her comment, but I recall reading that Safe Routes to School plan, and 5 million is the cost that was determined in that plan for a fully funded program. The program just has not reached that full funding to meet its target timelines and goals. So that's where that 5 million came from.
So I'm sorry, who was the author of the study and when was that?
Just letting my mute's off. That was the Department of Transportation Infrastructure. I don't remember what year it was. I think it was 2 years ago, something along, maybe 3, but it's relatively recent.
So in full support of that, I would just reference the report recommendation, just so it has a little bit more legitimacy. Thank you.
Great. That's great feedback. Thank you so much, Christopher. I appreciate that. Great. Well, any other thoughts on the high priorities before we move on to medium priorities quickly?
Sorry, I'm just reflecting on the deprioritize more. I think given that this is a wish list and it was ranked so highly in our survey results, I feel like actually eliminate might be the appropriate word. I haven't seen any proposed expansions of highways, and I think what we're saying is that is our wish. I guess we're drawing a distinction on deprioritization that I'm not sure I understand on a document that doesn't have like the force of law behind it.
Sure. So Jake, I'm hearing you say that based on the fact that it was written as eliminate and did score in the top 4 or 5, I think it is 5 or 6, that we should keep it as written to kind of honor that initial statement that folks voted on, and some of which aren't here right now.
That would be my thought, given that it did rank so highly in those survey results.
Okay. Any concerns from the group of changing it back? It sounds like it does honor the original intention of what was voted on and what did come up in the highest.
Let me, I guess, respond. I suppose if we need to do that, that's fine. I'm very cautious about, because I'm in the engineering business, of unintended consequences. And maybe the idea is we don't want to add extensive highway capacity or volume capacity versus just simply expansion. Because if you say expansion, you may be cutting off your safety nose, despite the Denver Moves goals, which are maybe inconsistent. So I think the word eliminate, as I've already stated, is too much of a cut and dried, but I think it should be softened, and maybe just say I don't know, maybe just emphasize Denver Moves 2050 goals as the reason. But again, I'm a bit hesitant to leave it the way it is, only because you have no idea what the unintended consequences are.
I'd be amenable to eliminate funding for highway capacity. I think Gary's right. Like, I don't think we want if a shoulder could be widened and it makes sense, like we should allow for that. But yeah, I think that would help get us closer. And again, this isn't law, and it's not actually the mayor's budget in and of itself. So the unintended consequences are not of the highest concern to me, but yeah, no, I think I'm amenable to the capacity change for sure.
Great, we'll add that in if there are no objections. Christopher, go ahead.
Thank you. I just think that it is clear that we certainly, as an advisory group, do not want to spend more money on highways or freeways. And that's evident by not having one wish list thing on here for that, So I think that we're making a very strong statement by saying eliminate or reduce or deprioritize, whatever we want to do. But I wonder if it would have more weight by just making it clear to those who receive this that no one on this board identified a freeway or highway initiative that we supported. That's kind of the reciprocal of what we're saying here. So, sorry to jump in.
No, that's helpful. So you're saying that by the unsaid is that it hasn't been identified in here as well. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Christopher. We should probably, in essence of time, we should probably move on to the medium priorities here. On the list here, we have more funding for rapid rectangular flashing beacons, also known as our RFB, the flashing signs at crosswalks. Fully funding the Elevate Denver backbone projects. I know for folks from West Denver, there was a bunch of projects that were recently delayed due to construction cost increasing, bike lanes, crosswalks, et cetera. We had the increased funding expansion for the very successful DOTI microtransit programs like the Denver Connector, formerly known as the Montbello Connector, in equity neighborhoods. Funding for more LPIs, or leading pedestrian indicators. So this is when the crosswalk turns white before the light turns green, and there's evidence showing that that helps prevent injuries to pedestrians. Fund the North Broadway bike lane expansion north of Spear Boulevard, and increase budget to plow plated bike lanes and neighborhood bikeways during snow events, with a consideration to keep things accessible. Any thoughts on these medium priorities? No, Christopher, I see your hands up. Is that from the previous one, or is that for this?
I do apologize, previous.
Great, no worries. Lower priority list. This is a good segue. Christopher, I believe it was you had some concerns about this first item here, the budget for more dignified bus shelters and shelter upgrades, focus on shelters that block wind, rain, and cold. Would you like to kind of, you wanted to have this as a discussion item for the group, so would love to have you share your thoughts on this one.
I did, and please go easy on me. But I am concerned about our shelters for buses turning into places where people are staying and housing themselves. And as important as transportation is to diversity and equity and inclusion, I would hate to do anything that would structurally limit or thwart the full use of our systems. So I'm just worried about homeless people taking them over and then it being an issue for clearing out. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that one, Christopher. Anyone else from the group have thoughts on that particular bullet point, concerns or otherwise?
Well, that's not how I read that. So I wasn't sure if that was then clearly stated.
Could you expand upon that a little bit, Joe?
Well, budget for more dignified bus shelters, was saying, I thought you wanted to increase the coziness, whatever, of the bus shelters, which would lead to more action with people wanting to stay there. So I didn't quite pick up on that. So that's why I'm saying it looks like it would be a better place to stay if we did this, as opposed to not as comfortable of a space. Now, I understand it may be the policing aspect that they do that. And I don't know who does that. Is that RTD who's responsible for the bus stops?
I think if I'm not mistaken, Nick, you can correct me. I believe the bus stops are the responsible, the structures around the bus stops, benches, shelters are the responsibility of the city that they're housed in, and not so much an RTD creation.
Generally, yes. We use what's called the transit amenities program. So those are the ones with advertising. Those are permitted through the city. We have a few others that don't have advertising that are just the infrastructure on that. RTD does have a few, especially along Colfax, went in a few years ago, but generally, yes. That was the longest answer to yes.
Great. Thanks for educating us on that. Julie, go ahead, and then we'll go to Jonathan.
On the shelters and even on the buses, the more unpleasant they're made to keep unhoused folks out, the harder it makes it for those of us who also use the bus. I know one thing, all winter, they were keeping windows on the bus open so that people didn't get too comfortable, but it was also freezing for those of us who were riding the bus. And same thing with the shelters, that you can't get out of the elements. And so to what end are we making it so uncomfortable because we don't want unhoused folks there? I just, I think that that doesn't, we've tried to making it really uncomfortable, and that has not increased ridership.
Great. Thanks for sharing those thoughts, Julie. I appreciate your perspective. Jonathan, go ahead.
I actually don't have too much to add. I was going to share thoughts very similar to Julie's. In fact, this morning I met with Phyllis Mack. She's the one who led the participatory budgeting item that I think won the most funding from our participatory budgeting program last year. She lives at a DHA property down on West Mosier Place. And she talked a lot about how difficult it is for her, a wheelchair user, and many of the elderly residents of the place to use the bus that is nearest to their station due to a lack of amenities or maintained amenities, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like while recognizing that, yes, we do have an increasing sort of unfortunate occurrence of more and more neighbors reaching an unhoused status and looking for shelter around the city because they can't find any other shelters that work for them and their needs. I'd hate to see a situation where we're, per se, throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, because of a perceived risk from this one type of ill along the transit experience, we will make multiple other parts of the transit experience significantly worse for the most common users and riders of that transportation. I know our transit-oriented populations, some of their top feedback about what is difficult about riding transit right now is a lack of benches or shade or garbage cans near their stops. So while yes, I think improving any section of the city may make it more attractive for any sorts of our residents. Happens with, parks too. Build a park in a neighborhood and suddenly a lot more people like to live near that park. I think we have to accept that there are trade-offs to some extent with these improvements. And I think that this one is a worthy one, despite any risk that it might engender.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Jonathan. Jake, go ahead.
I'll be brief because I think I'm adding to the same conversation. I'm pretty wary of what's called hostile design. I think that it tends to have pretty adverse effects when you design something to stop it from being used for a specific use. Like, we all know those benches that have the middle armrest so that people can't sleep on them, but there's a lot of people who are big enough that they can't sit at all anymore because all the benches have been designed so no one can sleep on them. And so I think if you've been at a bus stop for an extended period of time, you probably know it's not that pleasant, no matter how nice the structure is. And I think just the risk of, these are never four-sided structures. They're still pretty exposed to the elements. And I think we should just, we shouldn't take that small risk out on everyone waiting for the bus.
Great. I think the line item will definitely solve our city's homelessness crisis or not, right? It's a, I'm saying that very facetiously, right? I'm hearing from folks a lot of feedback, hey, please keep this in. And perhaps this is something, Christopher, for a future conversation, that we can have around these concerns. We can, maybe bring in some folks that are involved in this program to address some of your thoughts on a future.
Yes, its inclusion will not keep me from signing the letter.
All right, well, thank you. Hey, and thank you for bringing up that for your thoughts. And that was a good, healthy conversation I think we had as a group. Funding to study an upgraded First Avenue multi-use path between Downing and University Boulevard is the next item. Expanding awareness for the Snow Angel program, which is residents volunteering to plow other sidewalks, was another item we had here. Educational programs, more collaboration between the fire department on what Vision Zero efforts are and how they can be part of the life safety partnership with the department. Funding for time lights on collectors to slow traffic, increasing funding for roadside trash pickup, and funding to study where Denver may zero escape. And we had a late edition here based on some feedback from the Rhino and Globeville and Elyria Swansea community of funding to study improvements on the 38th Street underpass between Brighton Boulevard and Walnut Street. You guys may remember that had a awful flooding event earlier last year, I think it was. It's also pretty treacherous to bike, walk, or roll through if you've ever tried to use that sidewalk. So that was a wish list item that came in at the last minute as well. Any requests, any other thoughts on these items here? Objections, concerns, or anything like that? Nope. Don't see anything else in chat. Well, are we comfortable moving forward to take a vote on formally submitting this letter to the department?
Sorry, didn't let me have it there, but did want to ask briefly. I'm totally comfortable with that, but I do know that Nick and Earl are going to take a look at without the members of the department what they see as more or less feasible or viable for inclusion here. I'm wondering, do we want to send this without that consideration, or is there some way in which we want to take in that feedback before submitting here? And this is an open question. I actually don't know the answer myself. I think we want to get it off sooner rather than later, so we probably don't want to wait till next month to reassess it. But so I'm not sure at what juncture we'd be able to make those considerations. But perhaps we then, as I'm talking about it here, perhaps we submit the letter as is, and next month discuss what the department viewed as more or less viable. Yeah, just I guess thinking out loud here.
Nick, Earl, would you all be comfortable with us submitting this letter today? And we kind of have, as Jonathan mentioned, we have a conversation next week about, you guys can talk through, hey, this is totally doable. This is an alignment. These are kind of, we'll consider these, this is a maybe, and this would be very challenging because of, for whatever reasons that you all feel.
I certainly would, but I'll defer to the CFO.
That's fine on my end. Thank you.
Great. Jonathan, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, totally. And I think what that would mean, and just set context for everyone here, I think it's probably clear to everyone, them saying we think this is more or less viable is absolutely not a commitment to the department. It's just them saying, here's our opinion of what's more likely or less likely to be accepted as it moves forward. It's not that Nick and Earl even could control that conversation.
If only.
Joe?
Yeah, I know. I liked it. I like the idea that we haven't really considered the viability of all this, but it's our idea to bring the suggestions and we're looking for feedback. I like that idea. We're not restricting ourselves. And certainly I know the 38th Street underpass has to do with the railroad and everything else. So it may just be a wish list, but it's not for us necessarily to go through each item. It'd be nice if we could, but we're saying, hey, we're throwing it out to you. And we know some of the stuff may be too hard to do. So let us know. That's all.
Great. Any other thoughts from the group? Gary, I see you unmuted.
I do have
Go
one.
ahead, please.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this before, and that is that the structure of the overall budget, the presentation of the budget. Earl addressed three important issues early on in our meeting: the continued city services, the mandated expenses, and the inflationary pressures. It's very important for us to understand what those are. I also believe that it's very important for us to understand where the money or general obligation bond money, grant money, and how that works with tax money that's being collected, and where priorities should be placed to effectively spend those pots of money. And right now I don't understand any of that. So I think the list that we've got is fine, but I think there's an overall broader issue of hey, give us a presentation that gives us a real clear picture of what money's available and where's it going. Thank you.
One thing to add for you, Gary, would you be comfortable if we added a line to this that says something along the lines of, hey, as we think about the budget, not only for the department's budget of 24, but as we think about our future DRCOG funding and other sources of funding, these are some of the priorities that we think about? Or are you comfortable if we kind of say like, hey, this is our wish list, and it's not just restricted to the fiscal year budget, as you said, the tax budget?
Well, no, I'm comfortable with that. Mine is maybe even a different topic. We've provided a priority list of projects or focus areas, but I'm more interested in, understanding where the money is coming from and where it's going. How much is already obligated? How much is discretionary? Where can we suggest discretionary money going this year versus next year? So it's a pretty big issue. in my mind that we need to be able to understand it as an advisory board. So whatever you think, Jonathan, that's fine for this letter, but I'm hoping, or Alan, I'm hoping that we are able to, when it comes time, that we are given the opportunity to understand all of that interactions.
So just to provide a quick response to that that particular comment, which I think is very important, I think a great place to start is the Department of Transportation section of the current budget book. There's a lot of things that are, and I can send the link to that on the city's website, but I think a lot of those questions, but not all of them, can be answered with looking at various aspects of that, because I think that some of the, we probably would have to break that request down into something a little bit more bite-sized and manageable. And then just gradually over time, try to get there with a number of different topics through subsequent meetings. But yeah.
Sure.
Great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary. Lucia, we have 60 seconds before our meeting is over, so I'll let you roll before but hopefully we can have time for a vote too.
Okay, I just wanted to say that, I feel like the reason we got in this early is so we can create a wish list. And that's the early part. And then as the budget season moves in, then we get into the nitty gritty. But as an advisory board, I think it's our responsibility to advise, not that they're necessarily going to go for it and they're going to have their restrictions. But I think at this point, this is for us to go in and say, this is what we hear and feel are our priorities. And then when we got that, then we can start getting down to the nitty gritty. But at least DOTI has some direction, so to speak, from the advisory board as to what we think should be prioritized.
Great, thanks, Lucia. And Jonathan, I'd love to move. I see you have your hand up. I'd love to move that we take a vote on this letter to send as is.
So that was actually why my hand was up. Unfortunately, with the free department, we lost quorum. So I think we have to vote by email. Or is this something we could do without that?
Could you say that again, Jonathan? What's your recommendation?
I think we might need to vote by email, unfortunately, because we have lost quorum due to a few departures.
Great, we'll do that over email and go from there. But hopefully we'll keep the draft as is and get acceptance of it from folks. Thanks.
Yeah,
that's all the time.
Yeah, and so yes, I see we're at 6 p.m. Sorry for running us a little bit late. I was not a good steward of today's agenda. That being the case, it means we'll need to bump a couple of topics to next month. One is an update of our action items list. We just had a couple of items on it, so we'll punt those next month. Also, we were looking for an operations and policy committee report out. I know they intended this relates to the actions items. We were planning to talk a bit about their discussion of the railway safety study. So we'll punt those both to next month. Might be a little bit of an expanded conversation there. We're at 6:01 now. Thank you, Alan, for that coordination and presentation. And we'll look to get a voting form out as soon as possible so we don't delay the delivery of this letter. With that, thanks for joining our May meeting, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good month.
Happy spring.